When it comes to relationships, one of the most common yet damaging mistakes women make is chasing instead of attracting. This behavior, though often driven by genuine interest or affection, can significantly diminish your value in a man's eyes. While modern dating advice often encourages being assertive and open, there's a fine line between showing interest and over-pursuing. When that line is crossed, it changes the dynamic entirely and not in your favor. Chasing can take many forms. It's not just about making the first move or sending the first text. It shows up in subtle patterns. Double texting when he doesn't respond right away. Constantly checking in, rearranging your schedule to accommodate him, or always initiating plans. It's the emotional energy you give away too freely without waiting to see if he's equally invested. Over time, this imbalance creates an unspoken message that you're more into him than he is into you. And while movies romanticize grand gestures and relentless pursuit, in real life, it usually has the opposite effect. Men by nature are wired to pursue. That doesn't mean you should play games or manipulate, but there's something powerful about creating space for a man to come toward you. When a woman overextends herself, it removes the challenge and the sense of earning her attention. Attraction, at its core, is built on polarity and mystery, on the thrill of discovering someone, not being handed to them on a silver platter. If a man feels like he doesn't have to do anything to win your interest, it can subconsciously devalue your presence in his life. Also, chasing often comes from a place of insecurity. It's rooted in a fear of losing the connection or not being good enough, so there's this constant need to prove your worth, to be seen, to be chosen. But the truth is, the more you try to convince someone of your value, the less valuable you appear. Real confidence doesn't chase, it radiates. It trusts that the right person will recognize your worth without you having to scream it from the rooftops. This doesn't mean you should sit back and do nothing. Healthy relationships are reciprocal. It's about responding, not chasing. If he's showing effort, show appreciation. If he's reaching out, respond warmly. But if you find yourself doing all the emotional heavy lifting, it's time to step back and evaluate why you're working so hard for someone who's barely showing up. There's something incredibly attractive about a woman who knows her worth, who lets things unfold naturally without forcing or controlling outcomes. She doesn't fear losing someone who isn't choosing her wholeheartedly. She's open to love, but not dependent on it. She gives, but with discernment. This kind of energy is magnetic. It makes a man respect you, value your time, and want to rise to meet your standards. In the end, attraction isn't about chasing someone down. It's about being so in tune with yourself that the right people are drawn to your energy. You don't need to overextend to be seen or loved. What you need is to trust your own value and move with the kind of quiet confidence that makes people take notice. Because the truth is, the moment you stop chasing is the moment you start attracting. One of the most silent ways a woman lowers her value in a relationship is by having a lack of boundaries. At first, it may seem like being easygoing, flexible, or loving unconditionally, but over time it becomes clear that it's actually a pattern of self-betrayal disguised as kindness. When you don't have strong personal boundaries, you slowly teach others that your time, energy, emotions, and even self-respect are up for negotiation. And nothing kills attraction faster than a person who doesn't stand for themselves. Boundaries are not walls meant to keep people out. They're guidelines for how you allow yourself to be treated. They say, this is what's okay with me, and this is what isn't. Without them, you leave yourself open to emotional burnout, disrespect, and an unbalanced dynamic where you're constantly giving and rarely receiving. In the context of dating or a relationship, this can look like tolerating inconsistency, accepting last-minute plans, overlooking red flags, or staying silent when something bothers you. At first, a man may not even notice it, but over time it sends a clear message: you don't value yourself enough to set limits. A woman who lacks boundaries will often find herself over-accommodating, always saying yes, or avoiding conflict to keep the peace. The irony is that in trying to be more likable or agreeable, she often ends up being taken for granted. When you never say no, your yes starts to lose meaning. When you allow disrespect to go unchecked, even in small, subtle ways, it creates a pattern. And in that pattern, you begin to shrink, slowly losing your sense of self to fit into someone else's expectations or comfort zone. What makes this more complicated is that many women are raised to prioritize others, to be the nurturer, to compromise, and to be understanding. These qualities are beautiful, but when they aren't balanced with self-respect, they become dangerous. You end up making excuses for bad behavior, lowering your standards, or blaming yourself when things go wrong. And the more you compromise your values to keep someone in your life, the less they respect you, not because they're a bad person necessarily, but because people mirror how we treat ourselves. A woman with strong boundaries, on the other hand, commands respect without having to demand it. She knows that saying no doesn't make her difficult, it makes her clear. She's not afraid to walk away from situations or people that don't align with her values. And that energy, that's powerful. It tells a man that if he wants to be part of her world, he has to come correct not with games, not with empty promises, but with genuine effort and consistency. What's important to understand is that boundaries aren't about punishing someone else, they're about protecting your peace. They help you maintain your emotional and mental well being. They keep you aligned with who you are. And when you stand in that alignment, you naturally attract people who are willing to meet you there. The people who are uncomfortable with your boundaries are often the ones who benefited from you not having any. So if you're constantly feeling drained, unappreciated, or unseen in your relationship, it's worth asking yourself, where am I not honoring my own boundaries? Because the moment you start holding yourself to a higher standard is the moment others start doing the same. Your value doesn't come from how much you give, it comes from how well you protect what you give. And that starts with drawing the line. Emotional neediness is one of those subtle behaviors that can deeply affect how a man perceives a woman's value in a relationship. It's not about having feelings or wanting closeness that's healthy and human. The issue comes when your emotional world becomes dependent on his attention, his validation, and his presence. When your sense of self-worth is tied too tightly to how he treats you or how often he reassures you, it creates a pressure that most men instinctively pull away from. At the beginning of a relationship, it's natural to feel excited and even a bit vulnerable. You want to be seen, heard, and valued. But when that desire turns into a constant need for validation, like needing constant texts, reassurance about where you stand, or overanalyzing every little thing he says or does, it quickly becomes overwhelming. It sends the message that you're not grounded in your own emotional security. And when a man feels like he's responsible for your happiness or emotional stability, it becomes a burden rather than a bond. Neediness can show up in many ways. It could be anxiety when he doesn't text back fast enough, jealousy over small things, or needing constant confirmation that he still cares. It can also manifest through clinginess, wanting to be around him all the time, or panicking at the thought of him needing space. These behaviors often stem from a fear of abandonment or a belief that you're not enough unless someone else proves it to you. But ironically, the more you look to someone else to complete you or calm your fears, the more power you give away and the less attractive you become in the process. Confidence, on the other hand, is incredibly magnetic. A confident woman doesn't need to constantly be reassured because she knows her worth with or without a man's validation. She enjoys connection, but she isn't defined by it. Her world doesn't revolve around whether or not someone chooses her. And that independence is powerful. It allows space for a relationship to grow naturally without being suffocated by constant emotional demands. Men, like women, crave emotional safety. They want to feel that they can be themselves, that they won't be judged for needing time, space, or quiet moments. When a man feels like he's constantly walking on eggshells or being smothered by emotional intensity, he begins to distance himself. Not because he doesn't care, but because the dynamic becomes emotionally draining. Relationships thrive on balance, both people contributing emotionally without leaning so hard on each other that one feels like they're holding the whole thing up. It's also worth noting that emotional neediness isn't always loud. Sometimes it shows up in more subtle ways, like silently resenting him when he spends time with friends or constantly comparing your relationship to others. These feelings, when unspoken or unmanaged, create tension. And that tension doesn't feel like love, it feels like pressure. The key to breaking free from emotional neediness is self-awareness and self-nurturing. Start by checking in with yourself instead of looking outward every time you feel insecure. Practice sitting with your emotions, soothing yourself, and reminding yourself of your value. Develop your own life, hobbies, friendships, and passions so your emotional fulfillment doesn't rest solely on one person's shoulders. When you are emotionally whole within yourself, you bring peace to a relationship instead of pressure. You become someone who adds to a man's life, not someone who drains from it. And in that space of calm, grounded confidence, you'll find that the right man will not only be drawn to you, he'll respect, cherish, and pursue you without hesitation. Being inauthentic is one of the quietest ways to lose your value in front of a man, and the sad part is that many women don't even realize they're doing it. It usually starts with good intentions, wanting to be liked, to make a connection, or to keep the peace. So you bend a little. You laugh at things that aren't funny, pretend to like what he likes, suppress your true opinions, and shape yourself into what you think he wants. But over time, this performance starts to weigh you down. And even worse, it begins to erode the very foundation of the relationship. Because it's not built on truth, it's built on a version of you that isn't fully real. Authenticity is about being honest, emotionally open, and aligned with who you truly are. It means speaking your truth, owning your values, and expressing yourself without fear of being too much or not enough. When you show up authentically, you create real connection. But when you hide parts of yourself, you're not only lying to him, you're also lying to yourself. And sooner or later, that disconnect shows up in the form of resentment, miscommunication, or emotional distance. Men, whether they realize it or not, can feel when a woman isn't being genuine. It creates a sense of confusion or discomfort. He might not be able to pinpoint what's wrong, but he knows something feels off. Maybe you're always agreeing with him, or you never share your deeper thoughts, or you seem a little too eager to please. What's happening beneath the surface is that the relationship becomes more about performance than presence, and real intimacy can't grow in a space where one or both people are pretending. What's ironic is that in trying to be more appealing by filtering or editing yourself, you actually become less magnetic. Confidence doesn't come from being perfect, it comes from being real. From owning your quirks, your opinions, your emotions, and even your flaws. When you show up as yourself unfiltered, it creates a kind of grounded energy that people are naturally drawn to. You're not trying to impress, you're just being. And that level of self-assurance is far more powerful than any act you could put on. The fear of being authentic often comes from a fear of rejection. What if he doesn't like the real me? What if my honesty pushes him away? But here's the thing, if being yourself causes someone to lose interest, they were never truly connected to you in the first place. They were attracted to the version you were pretending to be. And maintaining that version is exhausting. Wouldn't you rather be loved for who you are than tolerated for who you're not? Being authentic doesn't mean being rude or oversharing everything on your mind. It means being aligned. If something bothers you, you speak on it. If you have different values, you honor them. If you're feeling unsure, you express it with grace and self-respect. It's not about being harsh, it's about being honest. And honesty, when done with compassion, builds trust. It shows that you value the relationship enough to be real, even when it's uncomfortable. At the end of the day, the most powerful thing you can be is yourself, not the version you think he wants, not the version that keeps the peace at your own expense, but the version that's honest, alive, and unafraid to take up space. Because the right man doesn't want perfection, he wants truth, he wants depth. And that only comes when you drop the act and let yourself be fully seen. One of the most overlooked but damaging ways to lose value in a relationship is by not having your own life. It often begins innocently. You meet someone, the connection is strong, and suddenly they become the center of your universe. You start spending all your time with them, neglecting your friends, pushing aside your hobbies, and letting go of the things that once made you feel alive and independent. At first, it feels like love and devotion, but over time, it can become suffocating both for you and for the person you're with. When a woman loses herself in a relationship, she stops being the vibrant, interesting person that initially attracted the man in the first place. Instead of being her own person, she becomes an extension of him. Her moods are tied to his, her schedule revolves around his, and her happiness becomes dependent on how he shows up. While this may feel like closeness, it's actually a form of emotional overdependence, and it can quickly lead to imbalance, resentment, and disconnection. A woman who doesn't have her own life may unintentionally put pressure on her partner to be her everything, her best friend, her emotional support system, her constant companion. But no one can fill that many roles perfectly, and trying to force a relationship into a space where it can't breathe. Men are drawn to women who are passionate, grounded, and self-sufficient, not in a cold or distant way, but in a way that shows she has a life full of purpose and meaning outside of him. It's also about energy. A woman with her own life brings something to the table. She has stories to share, experiences to talk about, goals she's working toward. She's not just reacting to someone else's world, she's creating her own. That kind of energy is magnetic. It's not about being unavailable or playing hard to get, it's about being fulfilled and whole, which naturally makes a man want to be part of your world rather than feel like he's responsible for completing it. On the flip side, when a woman gives up everything for a man, she unknowingly puts herself in a position of emotional vulnerability. If the relationship falters or he begins to pull away, she's left with nothing to fall back on, no strong friendships, no personal achievements, no identity outside of the relationship. That kind of emptiness is dangerous because it makes you more likely to tolerate poor treatment just to avoid losing the only thing you've invested in. Having your own life means maintaining your individuality. It means continuing to grow, learn, explore, and enjoy life on your own terms. It's taking time for your passions, nurturing your friendships, staying committed to your goals, and remembering that your life is valuable with or without a relationship. When you prioritize yourself, you become more grounded, more attractive, and more emotionally resilient. The healthiest relationships are built between two whole people, not two halves trying to complete each other. When both partners have full lives, the relationship becomes a beautiful addition to their happiness, not the sole source of it. You're not looking for someone to save you from your life, you're inviting someone to share in the richness of it. So never lose yourself in the process of loving someone else. Stay connected to who you are, what you love, and where you're going. Because when you have your own life, you don't just attract love, you inspire it. You create a dynamic where you're valued not for how much of yourself you give up, but for how powerfully you stand in your own identity. And that kind of presence is unforgettable. Constant negativity or drama can quietly and consistently destroy your value in a man's eyes, even if everything else in the relationship seems to be going well. It doesn't matter how attractive you are, how much you care, or how deeply you connect if your energy consistently feels heavy, draining, or emotionally chaotic, it's away at the foundation of connection and attraction. While every relationship will have its ups and downs, when conflict, complaining, or emotional outbursts become the norm instead of the exception, it creates a space that doesn't feel safe, calm, or inviting. Negativity isn't always loud. It can show up in subtle, everyday ways, constantly criticizing, seeing the worst in every situation, being pessimistic about the future, or always expecting the worst from a partner. Over time, this energy begins to wear on the emotional tone of the relationship. What once felt exciting and joyful starts to feel like emotional labor. No one wants to feel like they're always walking on eggshells, never knowing what might trigger an argument or emotional breakdown. Drama, in this context, doesn't just mean yelling or causing scenes. It can also mean creating problems where there are none, holding on to past issues, making small things into major conflicts, or constantly testing your partner's loyalty or love. These behaviors might come from past hurt or insecurity, but if left unchecked, they create emotional chaos. And chaos, no matter how passionate it might feel at times, eventually becomes exhausting. Men, like women, crave peace, not just silence, but emotional peace, a space where they can be themselves without fear of judgment or unnecessary conflict. When a man begins to associate a woman with stress, unpredictability, or emotional tension, he naturally pulls away. It's not because he doesn't care, but because human beings are wired to avoid pain and seek comfort. And if a relationship feels like more pain than peace, most people, regardless of gender, will eventually step back. What makes this even more dangerous is that negativity can start to feel like a habit. You might not even realize how often you're complaining, criticizing, or focusing on what's wrong instead of what's lacking. But emotions are contagious. The energy you bring into a relationship shapes the energy that comes back to you. If you constantly focus on the negative, it's hard to see the good, and it becomes easy to overlook the efforts your partner is making or the beautiful moments that are actually happening. That's not to say you need to fake happiness or suppress your emotions. Healthy relationships require honesty, and that includes expressing when you're upset, hurt, or disappointed. But there's a difference between occasional conflict and a pattern of emotional volatility. One strengthens a relationship through real communication, while the other slowly erodes trust and connection. The shift begins with self-awareness. Start paying attention to the emotional tone you're bringing into your relationship. Are you focusing on solutions or just venting? Are you expressing needs clearly or reacting from frustration? Are you bringing up the past to heal or to win an argument? These questions help you shift from drama to depth, from chaos to calm. Emotional maturity is magnetic. When you learn to manage your emotions, communicate with clarity, and approach situations with a calm, grounded energy, you create a space that feels safe and inviting. You become someone a man can open up to, rely on, and feel inspired by, not because you're always happy or perfect, but because you bring peace, not pressure. And in a world full of noise and stress, that kind of emotional stability is rare and deeply valuable.